It was Thanksgiving morning, and the turkey was already in the oven when I heard my son's wife say my name like I was a problem they needed to solve. I wasn't supposed to be in the hallway. I had come downstairs early to get my blood pressure medication. The bottle was on the kitchen counter, where I always left it, and I stopped when I heard her voice carrying through the thin gap of the guest bedroom door. Low, careful, the kind of voice you only use when you think you're alone. "Your father already trusts me," she said. "Today's the right time. Everyone's here. Everyone's happy. He won't think twice about it." I stood there in my socks on the hardwood floor, 67 years old, and I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the November air. "My name is Hank Alderman. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, designed drainage systems and bridge supports and things that most people never think about until they fail. I know how structures work. I know how load gets transferred. I know that when something looks stable from the outside, the cracks are usually hiding somewhere you're not looking." My wife, Loretta, passed 2 years before that Thanksgiving. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We'd been married 43 years, and I won't pretend the house didn't feel wrong after she was gone. Too quiet, too still, like a clock that kept ticking but had lost its reason. My son, my only child, had flown in for the funeral with his wife and their 2 kids. He stayed a week. Then he went back to Phoenix, and I stayed in the house in Millbrook, Ohio, the same house we'd bought in 1988, and I learned what it meant to eat breakfast alone every day. I don't blame him for leaving. He had a life, I understood that. What I didn't understand, not yet, was that the life he had was built on sand, and that my house was the rock he decided to stand on. My son's name is Dale. He's 41 now. He works in commercial real estate development, which means he raises money from investors to build things, and sometimes those things get built and sometimes they don't, and either way he always seems to need a little more than he has. His wife's name is Pamela. She's sharp in the way that a certain kind of person is sharp, always calculating, always friendly, always arriving at conversations slightly ahead of where you think they started. After Loretto died, Pamela was the one who called. Not Dale. Pamela. She'd call on Sunday afternoons just to check in, she said. She'd ask about my health, about my eating, about whether I was sleeping. She sent a fruit basket at Christmas. She sent a card on my birthday with a gift card to the hardware store inside because she knew I liked to putter around in the garage. I thought she was being kind. I was 67 years old, and I thought she was being kind. 6 months after Loretta passed, Dale called and said he was worried about me. Said it wasn't good for a man my age to be isolated. Said he and Pamela had been talking, and they thought it made sense for me to give Pamela power of attorney. Just for emergencies, he said. Just in case something happened, and someone needed to make decisions quickly. He said their neighbor had done it for his elderly father, and it had saved a lot of complications. I asked what kind of emergencies. He said health things mainly. Said if I had a stroke or a fall, they'd need to be able to act fast. Said it was just a precaution. I said I'd think about it. That was March. By July, I thought about it enough. I called my doctor, who gave me a referral to a geriatric care specialist, not because I needed one, but because I wanted an opinion. The doctor told me the same thing my attorney would later tell me, that a broad power of attorney is one of the most powerful legal documents a person can sign, and that signing it when you're healthy and clear-headed is very different from signing it when you're scared and alone and your son is on the phone telling you it's just a precaution. I didn't say anything to Dale about any of this. I just kept thinking about it. In August, Pamela called and mentioned very casually that they were going to be in Ohio for a conference in September, and maybe they could stop by and visit. She said she'd been reading about estate planning and had a few ideas she wanted to share. She said she could bring the paperwork, and they could get it done right there. No fuss, no attorneys needed, just family taking care of family. That was when I understood what the fruit basket was for. I want to be careful here. I want to be fair. I know Dale is my son. I know that parents are supposed to extend grace, supposed to assume the best, supposed to believe that the people they raised are fundamentally good. I tried. I held that belief as long as I could. But the conversation I overheard on Thanksgiving morning wasn't ambiguous. I stood in that hallway and I listened to my daughter-in-law tell my son that they needed to get me to sign the document that day before I talked to anyone else about it, because she'd spoken to a real estate attorney in Phoenix who told her that once I signed, they could list the Millbrook house as a managed asset, and with what comparable properties were selling for in that market, they were looking at a net of somewhere between $400,000 and $450,000 after commission. $450,000. The house I'd bought with Loretta in 1988. The house where Dale grew up, where he broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard, where we put a hook on the wall every Christmas for his stocking. That house had a price, and my daughter-in-law knew exactly what it was. My son said something I couldn't fully hear. Pamela answered he already half agreed to it in August. Today we just make it official. I'll keep him talking in the living room after dinner. You handle the papers. I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at the framed photo of Loretta on the nightstand, the one from our trip to Yellowstone in 2009, and I thought, she would have seen this coming about 18 months ago. Here is what I had done in the previous 4 months, starting from the week after Pamela's September call. First, I called an estate planning attorney named Miss Whitfield, a woman my dentist had recommended, who'd been practicing in Columbus for over 20 years. I told her everything, including the conversation about bringing the paperwork herself and getting it done without attorneys. Ms. Whitfield did not seem surprised. She said she heard variations of this situation more often than most people would think. She advised me to set up a revocable living trust, which would transfer ownership of the house and my other assets into the trust rather than leaving them exposed to any future POA maneuvers. She also advised me to document everything. Second, I changed my will. Dale had been the sole beneficiary. He was now listed for a modest inheritance, enough to know I hadn't forgotten him, not enough to make anyone's real estate calculations worthwhile. Third, I changed my power of attorney. Ms. Whitfield became my agent for health care decisions. My neighbor Ted, who I've known for over 20 years and who has no interest in my assets because he has his own, was designated for financial matters in the event of incapacitation. Fourth, I bought a small digital recorder from the electronics store on Route 40. I kept it in my shirt pocket. I had been keeping it there for 6 weeks by Thanksgiving morning. I went downstairs and I put the turkey baster in the dish and I said good morning to my grandchildren and I drank my coffee and I waited. Dinner was good actually. Pamela made the green bean casserole Loretta used to make. She'd asked me for the recipe the previous Christmas, and I'd given it to her, and I didn't know at the time how uncomfortable that would feel in hindsight. Dale carved the turkey. My grandchildren told me about school. Everything was warm and normal and slightly surreal, the way things feel when you know something no one else knows, you know. After the dishes were cleared, Pamela said she'd pour me a second cup of coffee and asked if I wanted to sit in the living room. She said the kids could watch a movie, give the adults some time to talk. I said that sounded fine. She brought the coffee. She sat down across from me. She started, gently, carefully, with how much she and Dale cared about me, how they thought about me all the time, how hard it was to be so far away and not know how I was doing. She talked about the unpredictability of life. She mentioned a neighbor of theirs, a man in his 70s, who'd had a fall and been hospitalized, and his family had been in complete chaos trying to manage things because he hadn't made any arrangements. I let her talk. She reached into her bag and took out a folder. "I talked to an attorney," she said, "just to understand your options. He put together something simple. Just a standard power of attorney, so that if anything ever happened, Dale would be able to step in and help. It's what any family would do." She set the folder on the coffee table between us, and she looked at me with an expression of such genuine concern that I almost second-guessed everything I knew. Almost. I said, "Can I take a look at that?" I opened the folder. It was indeed a power of attorney document. It was not narrow. It covered financial decisions, real estate transactions, banking, investment accounts. It was, in the language attorneys use, a general, durable power of attorney, the kind that transfers substantial control of a person's life to another individual. The kind Miss Whitfield had told me to watch out for, in exactly those words. I closed the folder. I set it back on the table. "Where's Dale?" I asked. Pamela said he'd stepped out for a bit of air. She said it was just a formality. I shouldn't overthink it. I said, "It's cold out. He must be cold." She smiled. "Hank, I know what this is," I said. The smile stayed in place. "What do you mean?" "I was in the hallway this morning," I said. "Early. I came down for my medication." The smile changed. Not gone. She was too practiced for that. But changed. Recalculated. I said, "I heard you tell him to keep me talking in the living room while he handled the papers. I heard you mention $400,000 and the Millbrook listing. I've been hearing things clearly my whole life. My hearing is excellent." She started to say something. I held up my hand. "I want to show you something," I said. I went to the kitchen drawer, where I keep things that need to stay visible: batteries, scissors, take-out menus from the two places I actually order from, and I took out two documents. The first was the trust agreement Ms. Whitfield had prepared, executed in October, transferring ownership of the house and my financial accounts into the Alderman Family Revocable Trust. The second was a letter from Miss Now, Whitfield's office, confirming that I had no current power of attorney document on file, and that any such document would need to be prepared and witnessed by her office. I set both documents on the coffee table next to Pamela's folder. "The house isn't mine to sign over," I said. "It belongs to the trust. That document you brought wouldn't do what you think it would do. The attorney who drafted it either didn't know that or didn't tell you." Pamela looked at the documents. She looked at me. Whatever she'd planned to say next, she hadn't planned for this. "I also want you to know," I said, and I reached into my shirt pocket, "that I've been carrying this since October." I set the recorder on the table. She looked at it for a long moment. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said. "That's between you and Dale and whatever you decide to do next," I said. "But I want to be clear about where I stand. I'm not angry. I'm not going to make a scene in front of the children. Dinner was good, and I appreciate you making Loretta's recipe, and I mean that. But this," I touched the folder, "this is done, and whatever has been building toward this is done. And if I hear from you or from Dale in any professional capacity regarding my house or my accounts or my assets, I'll have Ms. Maz Whitfield file the relevant paperwork with the county before the end of the business week." She didn't say anything. "You can take your folder," I said. Dale came back inside about 10 minutes later. He was carrying the look of a man who knew something had happened but hadn't been told what yet. Pamela spoke to him quietly in the kitchen. I sat in the living room and watched the end of the movie my grandchildren had put on. Something animated, a lot of bright colors. And I thought about Loretta, and about the oak tree in the backyard, and about the fact that 43 years of a good marriage produces a home that is worth more than any number on a comparable sales report. My grandchildren fell asleep on the couch before the movie ended. I covered them with the fleece blanket from the closet. They looked like the best thing I had ever done, which, in a roundabout way, I suppose they were. Dale found me in the kitchen, washing the roasting pan. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked like he did when he was 9 years old and had broken a window with a baseball and was trying to figure out how to have the conversation. "Dad," he said. "I know," I said. "I don't," she said. It made sense, I thought. "Dale." I turned off the faucet. "I'm going to say this once, and then I'm going to finish washing this pan. You are my son. I will always love you. But I have spent 67 years building something, and your mother spent 43 years building it with me, and it is not available. It is not a resource. It is not an asset in a column on someone's spreadsheet. Do you understand me?" He looked at the floor. "Do you understand me?" I said again. He said yes. I turned the faucet back on. They left the next morning. The drive to the Columbus airport is just under 2 hours, and I made it alone because I offered and they accepted. And the car was quiet in a way that felt different from the silence I'd been living with since Loretta died. That silence had been empty. This one felt like something had been cleared away, resolved, like a load that had been transferred to a foundation that could hold it. I drove back to Millbrook alone, and I made a pot of coffee and I sat at the kitchen table where Loretta and I used to do the crossword puzzle on Sunday mornings, and I thought about what I wanted the next chapter to look like. I called Ted next door and asked if he wanted to come over and watch the game. He came over with a bag of chips, and we watched football for 4 hours and didn't talk about anything important. And it was one of the better afternoons I'd had in a long time. The house is still mine. The trust holds it now, which means it will pass exactly where I intend it to pass, in exactly the way I intend it to pass, to the people I choose, my grandchildren, when the time comes, in equal shares, not to be sold, not to be listed as a managed asset, not to be converted into a number that solves someone else's problem. Loretta always said that the people who love you don't need to manage you. I spent 2 years after she died forgetting that. Then I spent 4 months remembering it. The recorder is back in the kitchen drawer now, next to the batteries and the scissors. I leave it there as a reminder, not of what happened, but of the fact that I was paying attention when it mattered. That's the only thing I'd tell anyone in my position. Not to be suspicious of everyone, not to assume the worst, not to wall yourself off from the people you raised and the people they married. Just to pay attention, to know what you have and why you have it, and what it cost the people you loved to help you build it. The turkey was good that year. Loretta's recipe holds up. I think about that folder on the coffee table a lot, not with anger. The anger burned off somewhere around mile 40 on the drive back from the Columbus airport. What I think about is the sequence of it, the fruit basket, the Sunday calls, the recipe, every small kindness that turned out to be a stone in a path that led somewhere I was never supposed to see coming. That's how it works, I've learned. It rarely starts with something that looks like betrayal. It starts with something that looks like love. What Pamela and Dale didn't account for was that I'd spent 31 years as an engineer. My whole career was built on one principle. You don't wait for a structure to fail before you figure out where the weak points are. You look at the load. You look at what's carrying it. You ask yourself what happens if this piece moves, if that connection shifts, if the ground underneath isn't what the plans say it is. I did that professionally for 3 decades, and somewhere along the way it became the way I looked at everything. I wasn't suspicious of my son. I want to be clear about that. I was paying attention. Those are different things. Suspicion assumes the worst before there's evidence. Attention just means you don't look away when something doesn't add up. When the calls start coming more regularly, when the paperwork gets mentioned a second time, when someone offers to bring the documents themselves so you don't have to bother with attorneys, I went to Miss Whitfield because I trusted the math more than I trusted the discomfort of being wrong about my own family, and I was right. Not because I'm especially smart, but because I did the one thing that protects you in almost any situation. I made a decision before I was under pressure to make one. The trust, the revised will, the recorder in the shirt pocket, none of that happened in a panic. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October when nothing was wrong yet, and I was just thinking clearly. That's the part I'd want anyone in my position to hold on to. The window when you can think clearly doesn't stay open forever. When the folder is already on the table and someone is watching your face, it's too late to make your best decisions. You make them before. You make them when you're calm and nobody is asking anything of you and the stakes don't feel real yet. Loretta used to say that character is what you do when no one's watching. I believe that. But I'd add something to it now. Wisdom is what you do before anyone asks you to, before the pressure arrives. Before the holiday dinner and the carefully prepared document and the expression of such genuine concern that you almost second-guess everything you know. Dale is still my son. That didn't change on Thanksgiving, and it won't change. But I understand now that loving someone and protecting yourself from them are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do for a relationship is to refuse to let it become something that can't be recovered from. By being ready, I kept that possibility open. If I'd signed that paper and found out later, there would have been no coming back from it. Not for him, not for me, not for any of it. The house is still standing. The trust holds it. My grandchildren will inherit it one day, and when they do, I hope they understand that what they're receiving isn't just a property on a county deed. It's 31 years of my work, and 43 years of their grandmother's life, and one very deliberate Thanksgiving afternoon in Millbrook, Ohio, where an old man sat across from a folder and didn't sign it. That's the whole story. That's what I'd want them to know.